structure shows who owns what. The percentages look neat. Family members each hold their shares on paper, everything appears organized. But tax law often asks a different question. Not just who owns the shares, but where did the value actually move? My name is Amandeep Singh, CPA, and I work with business owners and landlords at Cloudiverse CPAs in Burnaby. One thing I often see is that corporate structures can look very simple on paper, but once you examine how value moved between shareholders, the tax analysis becomes much more interesting. A well-known Canadian case illustrates this perfectly. In the case of the Queen versus Kieboom, Albert Kieboom ran a carpet business in Red Deer, Alberta, through a corporation called Carpet Color Center, Red Deer Limited. When the company was first incorporated, the ownership was very straightforward. Mr. Kieboom owned 9 shares. His wife owned 1 share. So he effectively controlled about 90% of the company. Then the structure started to change. The corporation created a new class of shares and Mrs. Kieboom purchased 8 of those shares for $1 each. These new shares carried equity rights similar to the original shares. With that step, the ownership picture shifted significantly. Mr. Kieboom's interest dropped from about 90% to roughly 50%. His wife now owned the other half of the company. Then another step followed. The company issued additional shares to couple's 3 children. Each child purchased 8 shares for $1 per share. But there was a critical detail. Evidence showed that the fair market value of each share at the time was approximately $6,800. So although the children paid only $1 per share, the economic value of each share was far higher. After these transactions, the ownership chart looked very different. Mr. Kieboom now held about 21% of the company. His wife held about 21%. Each of the 3 children held roughly 19%. If someone simply looked at the corporate records, it might appear that the business had gradually been shared with the family. But the Canada Revenue Agency looked at the situation from another angle. Later, the company declared dividends and Mr. Kieboom was reassessed. The key issue was not who technically issued the shares. The corporation issued them, of course. The key issue was what happened to the value of the existing shares. When new shares are issued at a very low price, the value of existing shareholders' interest becomes diluted. It goes down. Imagine a pie that originally belongs almost entirely to one person. If several new slices were suddenly created and given away at nominal price, the original owner's slice becomes smaller. And this is essentially what the court found that has happened. Even though the corporation issued the shares, the economic effect was that the value of Mr. Kieboom's ownership decreased, and that value effectively shifted to the new shareholders. The court explained that the income tax allows the minister to look beyond the legal form of a transaction and examine the substance behind it. The legislation specifically states that this analysis applies regardless of the form or legal effect of the transactions. So even though the corporate steps were legally valid, the court focused on the result. The result was that the children received shares worth far more than what they paid for them. That difference represented value that had previously belonged to the existing shareholders. The court concluded that this was a benefit conferred by the taxpayer. In effect, value had been transferred to the children. The court treated that transfer as a gift that occurred at fair market value. The court also examined the shares issued to Mrs. Kieboom. Even though the corporation issued those shares, the court concluded that the transaction effectively transferred part of Mr. Kieboom's ownership interest to his spouse. Now, because of that transfer, the spousal attribution rules apply. When dividends were later paid to Mrs. Kieboom on those shares, the income was attributed back to Mr. Kieboom. One of the most important points the court made was that the concept of a transfer of property in the income tax is interpreted very broadly. A transfer does not have to be direct. It can occur indirectly through corporate steps if the result is that ownership value moves from one person to another. As you can see in this case, the court concluded that value moved from the original shareholder to other family members because shares were issued at prices far below their true value. This reasoning is why tax lawyers often refer to the Kieboom decision when discussing corporate restructurings and family planning. It shows that value inside a corporation is represented by its shares. When new shares are issued cheaply, that value does not simply appear out of nowhere. It usually comes from the existing shareholders whose ownership becomes diluted. This is also why the case often comes up when advisors discuss estate freezes. Now, what is an estate freeze? It is a common planning strategy where the current owner exchanges their common shares for fixed value preferred shares. Now, new common shares are then issued to children or a family trust so that the future growth belongs to the next generation. When done properly, an estate freeze can be an effective planning tool. But the reasoning in the Kieboom case highlights an important risk. If the company is undervalued at the time of the freeze, the preferred shares may not fully capture the true value of the business. And when the new common shares are issued, they may end up capturing value that already existed in the company rather than only future growth. In that situation, the original owner's interest may be diluted more than intended. Under the reasoning in Kieboom, that extra value could be viewed as an indirect transfer of property to the new shareholders. That is why careful planning is essential in these situations. Now, best practice usually involves obtaining a reliable valuation of the company at the time of the restructuring, designing the share terms properly, and including price adjustment clauses that allow the structure to adjust if the valuation later proves to be incorrect. These steps help ensure that the intended structure reflects the true market value of the business. For the business owners, the lesson from this story is simple but very important. Corporate structures are not judged only by how they look on paper. Courts look at where the value actually moved. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Until then, bye.